Hello and welcome. In this lecture, we will explain Article 30 of Indian Constitution. Article 30, which is about the educational institutions established by minorities. In India, there are two types of minorities. The first is a religious minority. The second is linguistic minority. In this lecture, we will explain how their educational institutions, which are created by minorities, which are established by minorities, and administered by minorities, are protected under the Article 30. Article 30, which says about the rights of minorities to establish and to administer the educational institutions, means in the democratic framework the minorities has the right to establish their own educational institutions and to administer those institutions. The right is protected under Article 30. The institutions may be aided by government, funded by government, or may be unaided or non-funded by government, may be run totally private. In Article 30, which protects the right of minorities to establish and to administer the educational institutions, the minorities can establish and administer their own educational institutions in order to protect their cultural and educational rights that is preserved in the democratic framework of India, in order to protect their cultural and educational rights. And in terms of education, they might have their own educational setup, their different cultural education or theocratic education. In case of India, if we will see about the Christians, the Muslims, and the Sikh or Parsi, they are small in number in many of the regions of India. So they need to protect, in order to protect their culture and their education, their script, their language, they might establish their own institution and even they can administer their educational institutions. The first right is to establish educational institutions. The second one is to administer these institutions. The institutions that are established by the minorities and the right to administer these institutions so that they can be protected against the discrimination, or their culture, their heritage, their language has to be protected. There are few cases by Supreme Court in which the Supreme Court provided judgment on various cases regarding Article 30 or regarding the educational setup of minorities, the institutions established by minorities. There was a case in 2002, TMA Pi Foundation versus State of Karnataka, in which the Supreme Court upheld the right of minority institutions to select student and set a reasonable fee to save the minority, in which in this case the Supreme Court upheld that the minority institutions can select their own students. There can be a selection process of the students. The selection process should be reasonable and it should be logical, and can set a reasonable fees for the students of that minority community. And under Article 30, though these institutions are provided the autonomy to run, to operate. These are the minority institutions like Christian schools run by the Christians, especially for the Christians. The Islamic madrasas are the same category. Sikh gurudwaras, gurukuls, to preserve their cultural heritage, to preserve their cultural heritage. These also contributing the national education in other way. The minorities also getting education in their own institutions in order to protect their culture and their educational rights. There was another case in 1992 between the Delhi University and St. Stephen's College of Delhi. This was a case in which educational institutions' right to maintain their identity while receiving aid. This case also was related to the admissions or the reservations of seats for the minority institutions, for the minority students in the minority institutions. So, Delhi University versus St. Stephen College, which is in Delhi. In this case, because this college, St. Stephen College, was receiving aid from the government, so Delhi universities had an argument with St. Stephen College that you can't reserve seats for the Christian community. For that, in under Article 30, the St. Stephen's College went to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court provided a judgment that while receiving state aid, the institution can also maintain their identity. That reinforcing Article 30, the protection under Article 30. That is, Article 30 is provided for the added and non-added institutions. Means the institutions that are providing financial help from the government or the institutions that are running privately. Article 30 is applied on both the institutions. Then to gain a minority institution, the recognition of minority institution, proper documentation is required along with the proof of continuous operation for the community benefit. In order to get the recognition of a minority institution, you need to work continuously for the benefit of the community, and admission criteria should be transparent. There should not be absurd admission criteria. The admission criteria should be transparent, and the National Commission for Minority Educational Institutions will oversee the process to protect the minority right, to safeguard the constitution. So in this lecture we have explained how Article 30 protects the rights of minorities in order to protect their cultural and educational rights.